You're watching NewsX. I am Rishabh Gulati. Ladies and gentlemen, when there is a time of war and bullets are flying, the people who suffer are generally the innocents bearing something that you and I can't understand. In Greek history, they said war is about old men talking and young men dying. In a more recent context, and I'm going to quote from an author by the name of Wilbur Smith, who wrote most of his fiction based out of Africa, there are heroes and there are monsters, but most of us are ordinary mortals, trapped in times far too turbulent for us. So what we are seeing happening in Ukraine is Ukrainians dying and Russians dying. What we are seeing happening in Gaza are Israelis dying, Muslims dying, Arabs dying. We don't often understand that the larger context is being played out elsewhere. And sometimes we get so consumed by our own inability to understand the difference between my tragedy versus your tragedy. The one-upmanship of death, which is worse and merits global attention and million-person marches in London, and which simply doesn't matter. It is illegal in Germany to deny the Holocaust. The reason is because there are many people who are convinced that it never took place until they were showed the imagery, the visuals, the photographs, which were recorded for living memory exactly for this region. Because if we were to investigate further and think about what Napoleon did in Jaffna, down the road from Jerusalem, and the massacres of Alexander, whom we call the Great, maybe we would look at these historical figures most unkindly. So that brings us to the immediate context. What you're seeing playing out in Western Pakistan, affecting 1.5 million Muslim Afghan refugees, is no less a nightmare than that affecting those people who are losing their lives in Israel and in Gaza. These are innocent people who are being hounded because of state politics. We've forgotten them. Well, one person has remembered them today, Angelina Jolie, believe it or not. We've forgotten the countless tens of thousands who have been killed by the Pakistani army in Balochistan, all Muslims. We've forgotten the millions being persecuted in East Turkestan by the Chinese, all Muslims. We've forgotten the killings by the Houthis in Yemen, the killings by the ISIS in Syria. Why? It would make no sense. There are millions of people, there are millions of Muslims. Where are the rallies in Paris, in Washington, in New York, in London? There aren't any. Why? Rather strange. So let's open up this conversation. Joining us on the broadcast to have a detailed conversation on this is Professor Madhav Nalapat, Editorial Director of the Sunday Guardian. Pathikrit is joining us on the broadcast. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee is on the broadcast as well, and as Mo join, I'll just introduce them. Professor Nalapat, now in this context, sir, it's a Hollywood film star who has picked up on the plight of the Afghans who are being at the point of a bayonet and at the point of certain death, being shoved by the Pakistanis out of their refugee camps. Are we paying enough attention to this? Why is this not a point of conversation in every global capital?
Well, I'm glad that at least Angelina Jolie has raised this point. Rishabh, there has been a very strong move by women in Afghanistan in particular, Pashtun, Uzbek, Hazara, Tajik, to have equal rights with men. And of course, many of them have been hounded out, they've been driven out, they've been persecuted, they've been killed, and some of them have had to move to Europe for their own safety. But this movement is there, and possibly someone from this women's movement, I would not call it women's liberation, women's equality movement among the Afghan population, possibly they reached out to Angelina Jolie, we don't know. But the reality is, Rishabh, this very cruel action by the Pakistan military clearly demonstrates that they use religion only for their own narrow collateral purposes. They're not serious about the religion at all. Then I'm sure most of them don't understand the fundamental tenets of this very great religion. This has been used to, in fact, partition India, weaken India. This has been used to create divisions in society, in India, very visibly in 1947. Of course, in Pakistan, there's no question of any minority because minorities have almost disappeared. But the reality is that religion is often used as a cloak for very ugly purposes, and purposes that, that basically are unspeakable. And now you're seeing this happen, for example, in this conflict between Hamas and Israel. It's a fight between the IDF and Hamas. Hamas is not representative even of the people of Gaza, let alone the Palestinian people, who are an extremely talented people. Their principles are certainly not representative of the great principles of Islam, but they cloak themselves in that.
Okay.
And unfortunately, hundreds of thousands and millions of people fall victim to that propaganda, and then they go on the streets.
Okay.
So it is very unfortunate that religion is being misused in this manner, in an extremely incorrect and unforgivable way.
Okay, so primarily we will be learning a very bitter lesson that religion is just a pretext. Pakistan is facing a hot war on its western front. There is a demand for the creation of Pashtunistan. The Afghan refugees, who are all Muslim, are being used as a pawn by the Pakistanis to push them into Afghanistan, to create a crisis for the government in Kabul, and therefore use this as a bargaining chip for what is taking place and ease the pressure and negotiation stand, leverage. That's what it's come down to, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so let's get a better understanding of what exactly the context of the issue is. James Dorsey is joining us. He is the adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Mr. Dorsey, thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. Can you help us understand, when we are referring to these 1.5 million refugees, where have they been, for how long have they been there, what is happening to them now, and what do you suspect is going to happen in the next few days?
Sure. If I can do so in part by begging to differ with Professor Madhav. I don't think religion is the issue here. I don't think it's the issue in terms of Afghan refugees who are in Pakistan. I don't think it's the issue in Ukraine. And I don't think it's the issue in Palestine and Israel. I think in all of these cases, what we are seeing is politicians using innocent civilians or victims of conflict as cannon fodder and pawns. Mm-hmm. And it's cynical, if you ask me, to be polite about it. Religion is used as a legitimizer. So you see that in terms of the Israelis, you see that in terms of Hamas, but at the end of the day, it is not about religion. In the case of the that's one thing, I think. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Muslim world, and that, and so the thinking really behind what we're criticizing, lack for support for Afghan refugees, lack for support for the Rohingya, lack of support for the Uyghurs, moderate support at best for Palestinians in Gaza at the moment. The thinking behind all of this is that a Muslim world, or one pillar of the Muslim world, is Muslim solidarity. It's not. And that was very evident last Saturday when the heads of state of the Arab League and of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation met. It was a toothless statement. And if you look at this, and if you look at the individual statements made by various leaders, the differences between them were open and on the table. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a question partly of managing our expectations and maybe realizing that we're making false assumptions when we try and evaluate what's happening.
That's fair enough, but how do we then put into context what is happening right now on the Afpak border, both what is happening in the northwest as well as the expulsion of the refugees?
I think what you're seeing in Pakistan, I think one issue that you mentioned correctly is the issue of ethnicity and ethnic nationalism. But I think more broader, what you're also seeing is really an international trend, which is the whole issue of migration and a very strong growing feeling. Look at Turkey and Syrian refugees. Mm-hmm. And by the way, to mention, double standards, and there's no question about the double standards that are being applied in terms of the current Gaza war. But present in the room in Riyadh at last Saturday's summit was President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, whose conduct of the Syrian war over a decade was no different from the conduct of Israel of its war in Gaza.
Yes, so then that begs the question, and let me get Ambassador Mukherjee into this. Ambassador Mukherjee, what is this? Is geopolitics now basically dependent on PR, on propaganda? And that's all that matters. The reality on the ground is telling us that what is happening in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Balochistan, in East Turkestan, in Syria, in Yemen, were deadly, horrible things that are continuing, and yet they're nowhere in our mind space.
Let me try to put this in the perspective of our region, first of all. And I very much benefited from the comments by Professor Dorsey. When the Taliban took power and threw out a Western India-supported government where human rights for women were assured, education for women was coming along beautifully, etc., they regarded it as a victory against India. They said that they are going to use Afghanistan as strategic space to destroy India. So sitting here in Delhi, I would first like to say that the design of the Pakistan deep state to use the Taliban and the Talibanized Afghanistan as strategic deep space to destroy India has been completely demolished by these developments, number one. Number two, as far as the present situation is concerned, I would agree that in Islam, which is a complex religion, Muslims have killed Muslims depending on what kind of Muslim they are, what's their tribe, what's their ethnicity, are they Shias or they Sunnis. There are some Muslims who have taken refuge in India who are not regarded as good Muslims by the Sunnis, etc. But more than that, like everywhere else in the world, it is a strategic consideration that drives these issues. And what is happening right now is, as you correctly pointed out, Rishabh, that the forcible expulsion of Afghan refugees, which is a total violation of the United Nations Refugee Convention to which Pakistan is a signatory, demonstrates that they have decided to use these helpless, particularly women and children who face a totally uncertain future back in Talibanized 10th century Afghanistan, to put pressure, to get pressure off. But it's not going to work for two reasons, Rishabh. First of all, the Durand Line, created by the British colonizer, has been described as a knife pointed at the heart of every Pathan. Why? Because it was drawn up, like many other borders, unfortunately, by the Brits, without any logic whatsoever. So Pathan families were divided by the Durand Line, and no self-respecting Afghan, be he westernized or be he Talibanized, accepts the validity of the Durand Line as an international frontier between India and between Pakistan and Afghanistan. That's the first issue. Secondly, pushing these people back is a temporary solution. And I would like to point out that in 1971, when we had 10 million East Pakistani refugees who turned the whole of Calcutta into one giant refugee camp, you cannot imagine the chaos, Rishabh. I've seen it with my own eyes. Nobody helped us. Nobody gave us aid. There was no UNHCR. We liberated East Pakistan, and the 10 million refugees went back to East Pakistan. So the point here is, you can expel refugees, but you don't solve any issues at all.
Okay.
And when you use violence against them, there'll be more and more violence. There will be public opinion which will turn against them, exactly as what Angelina Jolie has said.
Yeah, maybe, we've been showcasing very courageous Balochis who come and tell the story of what's happening in Balochistan. But when a Balochi activist is killed in Toronto, nobody seems to notice. But of course, when a Khalistani gets killed, it's India's fault. So we see hypocrisy happen all across the globe, and I'm sure within our country as well. So let me get Patikrit. Patikrit, is this what it is then? That Pakistan knows it's under pressure in Pashtunistan, it's a hot war, and they are using 1.5 million civilians as leverage?
Well, that can be one of the reasons. I think the other reason, Rishabh, is this, that even though I have no sympathy for Pakistan, but Tehreek-e-Taliban sympathizers are all across among the Afghans. So they have a fear that the intensity of suicide bombing might go up. Apart from that, Pakistanis themselves don't know food to eat. So for them, literally, these Afghans are a burden and nothing more less than that. Frankly speaking, if you look at the larger context, why nobody cares about why the Afghans are being pushed away into Afghanistan, and why nobody cares about many other things, whereas a lot of focus is on Middle East. Frankly speaking, even on Middle East, Rishabh, it's my personal opinion, the Israel-Palestine issue would not even have created so much furor had the Israelis being as much Muslim as the Palestinians were. Because when the Yemen war was going on, and 300,000 plus people died in a war between the Houthis and the Arab-led coalition, nobody blinked an eye. When the Uyghurs die, nobody blinks an eye, simply because the Chinese economy is so overwhelmingly large that the likes of Angelina Jolie will be censured if they ask a question. So fundamentally, religion does play a role, or it is religious chauvinism is used. And when there are no religious differences, then the battle of supremacy based on sectarian issues or based on ethnicity come on. For example, right now in the Middle East, there is no denial that there is a battle of supremacy going on between the Iranians, the Saudis, and the Turks. So each one is trying to, make sure that they are being shown as, the legitimate ruler and decision-making country as far as the Muslim Ummah is concerned. We cannot deny that. So if you ask me about what is happening in Pakistan, Pakistan also knows that this is the most convenient time to do whatever they want to do, because the entire focus is on Middle East.
Okay.
We must also not forget, Rishabh, these refugees did not come voluntarily. They came because of the Western policy on Afghanistan in the 1970s, because of which they were pushed into Pakistan. Now they are being pushed back because Pakistan is a spent cartridge for the West. So nobody will blink an eye what happens in Afghanistan, as in any case. They have left behind a lot of arsenal in Afghanistan when they went back. to make sure that the war between the two countries continue for a long period of time.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, Rishabh, it is about one thing Prime Minister Modi said, that this is not an era of war.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the conflict resolution mechanism does not exist of United Nations.
No, it doesn't exist. So let's ask for a straightforward, begs for a straightforward question. Professor Nalapat, is there any cause to bring global, public, diplomatic and otherwise pressure on Pakistan for what it is doing?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that Professor Dorsey mentioned in much more elegant language precisely the point I mentioned, that is that religion is being misused. And basically, it's not religion at all that's the factor, it's a misuse of religion. But having said that, I'd like to point out the problem that is facing the Pakistan military is that Pashtuns are no longer the docile people that they were, in which they blindly followed the orders of the Pakistan military. Even in Afghanistan, if you recall, we had mentioned about 6 groups in Taliban, 3 of which were free Taliban, independent of both Pakistan and China. And these 3 free Taliban groups have become very powerful. The Pashtuns resent the effort by the Pakistan military, which is basically controlled by a single province of Pakistan, the Punjab province. They resent that very badly. And as a consequence, the Pashtuns have ceased to be useful to Pakistan. They have in fact become a problem for Pakistan. And therefore, they are being pushed back. And I think they are being pushed back, frankly, because the Taliban is not really playing the game that Pakistan wanted it to play. Instead of going after India, they are basically, a lot of the Pashtuns regard Pakistan as the country that is really harming the interests of the Pashtuns and the Baloch, if I may say so, and the Sindhis, and you know, not to mention the minorities who have become non-existent. So I'd only like to say this is going to only create more problems for Pakistan. The border is very porous. They'll come straight back in, and they're going to come back in with a feeling of anger and with being Pashtuns, being Afghan. They will not forget this humiliation.
So that leaves 2 thoughts. Let me get to Ambassador Mukherjee first. Ambassador Mukherjee, can Pakistan, for whatever intents and purpose it is, started doing it now, and we can guess at what the intent and purpose is, can they pull it off? Can they push back 1.5 million Afghans and think that they've got a victory or mission accomplished?
They can only do that if they order the Pakistani army to shoot down unarmed civilians. The Pakistani army, like the Indian army, is a professional army. Professional armies normally do not like murdering civilians. That's not their job. I think that they would have a huge problem, because there are also Pashtuns in the Pakistani army. It's not such a simple game. Moreover, it's an open border. It is porous. It is not easy to police. And I don't understand how they could ever have thought they could pull it off. It's also a semi-failed state. Their economic condition is dire. They don't have enough money for buying food and necessities for their own people. Their politics are in a state of complete confusion. Their prime ministers regularly go to jail and come out of jail. Pakistan is fast becoming a caricature of a state. I don't see them pulling it off at all. In fact, I would say, to conclude, Rishabh, since you and I are students of history, that it is very difficult to conquer Afghanistan. You would remember that the British tried and the entire army was decimated. If the Pakistanis think that they can succeed where the Brits failed, they are very sadly mistaken. These 1.5 million people will come back and wreak havoc and take revenge on those who push them back.
Dr. Dorsey, if there is to be a pushback, and I know we can be cynical about the pushback, why is it up to an Angelina Jolie to even attempt it? Where's everybody else?
Look, I think that we've got to realize that the world is littered with what are basically perceived as obscure conflicts. Kurds, Balochistan, Afghan refugees, just go down the list. Therefore, certainly in a world in which you see the rule of law and the world order breaking down and the adherence to international law, Countries are a lot freer to do things. Now, why are these obscure issues? For multiple reasons. Some of them are obscure in and of themselves. Obscure, with other words, from the perspective of an international community. And I think you've got to be careful in terms of when we use the term international community, we're really talking about the West. China's not going to interfere. It doesn't interfere in these kind of issues. It just lets it go. Russia's not going to interfere, also because by and large it doesn't interfere in those kind of issues, and obviously it has bigger fish to fry at this moment. And the West has multiple issues, and for them these are minor issues.
Okay.
They're not minor issues for Afghan refugees, don't misunderstand me.
Yes.
But they are major.
But you made a
issues.
good point. When we say we are expecting a pushback, where's it going to come from? So let me put that question to Pathikrit. Pathikrit, you'd think that if anybody should be holding Pakistan to account for whatever it does, it should be us. We're not doing any pushback either.
Granted, I think that's
Well, ideally,
absolutely true.
Yeah, sir, if you-
I think that's absolutely true. But what I'm saying is,
Yes.
okay, in the case of obviously of the Afghans, India has a direct interest, and it is a regional power. But presumably India is going to be cautious on this because it doesn't want criticism of its own internal affairs.
Yes, fair enough. Pathikrit, why don't you take that thought?
Well,
Sorry?
Rishabh, I think, Rishabh, frankly speaking, I don't know what officially the government of India will say, but invariably there will be a lot of support that India would give to Afghanistan, and invariably in UN and somewhere else, in other forums, this issue will be raised. But I think if they keep on pushing back the Afghans, they will push them through the Durand line, they will enter through the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa again, because that region is where the Tehrik-e-Taliban has huge support base, and it will be very difficult for Pakistan to hold that place. And invariably what was going to happen next, you would see now Tehrik-e-Taliban will continue to do what they want to do in terms of imploding Pakistan from inside. We have seen it has already started. My last point, Rishabh, this is also a bargaining chip in the hand of Pakistan. Pakistanis are waiting for the West to ask, why are you doing that? Then they would say, either you give us the money for our own requirements, or we don't have money, food to...
I suspect the same. Yes, it seems, yeah, that's where the puzzle piece is. Pawns.
And let me tell, last point, Rishabh, they also know for the OIC, right now the focus is so much is on Middle East that they don't care two hoots what happens in that region, Afghan region. But yes, I think the Afghan people, given the solidarity that we saw in the cricket matches in World Cup, I think there's a lot of expectation from Afghanistan, from India at least. Whether it is in terms of India.
Yes, well, Pathikrit, perhaps we can leave this conversation rest assured that very shortly the Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan on the beaches of Kozhikode will be organizing a rally in which he'll be bringing, setting up large screens in which Afghan leaders will be addressing and talking about the plight of the refugees. I'm sure this is about to happen in Kerala, and if not, it would be a shocking reason why it's not happened. Because of course Muslims are dying and Pakistanis are killing them. Strange. I thank my guests.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.